What happens when the man trusted to lead a congregation is hiding the darkest secret imaginable? A simple DNA test shattered the life of a preacher's wife, but what he did next will leave you questioning everything about faith, betrayal, and the human soul. Pastor Jonathan Blake was a man of God. Known for his fiery sermons and unwavering commitment to faith, he was a beacon of hope for his congregation in Jacksonville, Florida. He and his wife, Amanda, were the picture-perfect couple, married for 15 years with 5 beautiful children. Together, they represented everything good in the world: love, faith, and family. But behind the smiles and the sermons, a darkness was lurking, one that would soon come to light in the most horrifying way. It started with a whisper, a nagging suspicion Amanda couldn't shake. The children's features seemed too similar to someone else in their lives, someone they trusted deeply. The thought haunted her for months, but she dismissed it as paranoia. After all, Jonathan had always been a faithful husband, a loving father. But Amanda's intuition gnawed at her like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. One day, she ordered DNA kits for the entire family, disguising the tests as a fun family activity. Jonathan hesitated, his usual charismatic smile faltering for just a moment. But Amanda was persuasive. He reluctantly agreed. The results arrived 2 weeks later. Amanda waited until the kids were asleep to open them. With each sheet she read, her heart raced faster. When she got to the final page, her breath caught in her throat. The results confirmed her darkest fear. Jonathan wasn't the biological father of their children. But the real shock came next. DNA analysis revealed that the true father was Jonathan's own father, Reverend Samuel Blake, a retired preacher revered across the state. Amanda dropped the papers and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The man she thought was her soulmate had been living a lie, a horrific, twisted secret that now threatened to destroy their family. Amanda couldn't stay silent. That night, as Jonathan returned home from a late-night service, she confronted him. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp, cutting through the facade Jonathan had carefully built. She laid the DNA results on the table and watched as his face turned ashen. At first, Jonathan denied it, accusing Amanda of fabricating the evidence. But as she pressed him, his demeanor changed. The charming preacher she had loved morphed into someone else entirely, cold, calculating, and terrifying. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice low and threatening. "Some secrets are better left buried." Days after the confrontation, Amanda disappeared. Friends and family were concerned, but Jonathan maintained that she had gone on a spiritual retreat. He preached about forgiveness and redemption that Sunday, his usual charisma masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. But Amanda's sister Sarah wasn't convinced. She contacted the police and demanded an investigation. What they found in the Blake household sent shockwaves through the community. When police searched the home, they found a padlocked freezer in the garage. Jonathan claimed it contained venison from a hunting trip. But when investigators pried it open, they uncovered a grisly scene. Amanda's dismembered remains, wrapped in plastic. Bloodstains in the basement suggested a brutal struggle had taken place. The once revered preacher was arrested on the spot, his stoic expression betraying no remorse. As the news spread, his congregation was thrown into chaos. How could a man of God commit such an unthinkable act? The police wasted no time bringing Jonathan in for questioning. As the hours ticked by, detectives peeled away layers of his facade. At first, Jonathan remained silent, his lawyer urging him not to speak. But as the evidence piled up, bloodstained tools, Amanda's cell phone, hidden in a drawer, and the DNA test results, they finally broke through his defenses. "You don't understand what I was protecting," Jonathan hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Amanda wasn't innocent. She was tearing this family apart with her lies. The detectives pressed him for more details, but Jonathan's words became cryptic, almost nonsensical. It was clear there was more to the story, something even darker than they had imagined. As investigators delved deeper into Jonathan's life, they uncovered a twisted family history. Reverend Samuel Blake, Jonathan's father, had been more than just a preacher. He was a manipulative patriarch who controlled every aspect of his family's lives. Several former congregation members came forward, recounting eerie tales of Samuel's special blessings for women in the church. Rumors of abuse had circulated for years, but no one dared to challenge the revered man. Jonathan had grown up in his father's shadow, molded by fear and indoctrination. He idolized Samuel, even as he witnessed unspeakable acts committed under the guise of faith. When he learned that his own father had fathered his children, it shattered something within him. But instead of turning on Samuel, Jonathan directed his fury at Amanda, the woman who exposed the secret. The trial became a media sensation. The courtroom was packed every day, with reporters and curious onlookers vying for a glimpse of the man who had betrayed his family and his faith. Jonathan's defense team painted him as a victim of his father's manipulation, a man pushed to the brink by the devastating revelations. But the prosecution painted a far darker picture, a man consumed by rage and jealousy who saw Amanda's discovery as a threat to his carefully constructed image. They presented chilling evidence. Text messages Amanda had sent to a friend expressing her fears, and recordings she had secretly made of Jonathan's increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to her death. The case took an unexpected turn when a young man named David came forward. He was one of Samuel's illegitimate children, born out of an affair with a church secretary decades earlier. David testified about the abuse he suffered under Samuel's control and the chilling threats Samuel used to silence him. David's testimony added a new layer to the case. Could Jonathan have been acting under his father's influence, or was he just as twisted as Samuel? The jury was left to wrestle with these questions as the trial dragged on, each day revealing another shocking detail. Just when it seemed justice would prevail, Jonathan made a daring escape. During a transfer from the courthouse to the detention center, he overpowered a guard and vanished into the night. His disappearance sparked a statewide manhunt. As the days turned into weeks, Jonathan's face was plastered on every news station and social media feed. Sightings were reported across Florida, but each lead turned cold. The public was gripped with fear. Was Jonathan hiding in plain sight, or had he fled the state altogether? Months later, a neighbor reported strange activity at the Blake household. Police arrived to find the back door ajar and the faint smell of bleach wafting through the air. In the basement, they discovered a chilling sight: a wall covered in photographs and Bible verses scrawled in red ink. At the center was a photo of Amanda, her face crossed out. It became clear Jonathan had returned to his home, but he was gone before police arrived. The discovery reignited the hunt, with authorities warning the public that Jonathan was more dangerous than ever. As police scoured the Blake home, they discovered a tape hidden inside an old family Bible. The tape, labeled "For the Truth," was immediately sent to the lab for analysis. When investigators finally played it, they were met with a chilling sight. Jonathan, sitting in what appeared to be a dingy motel room, staring directly into the camera. His eyes were sunken, his face gaunt, a stark contrast to the polished preacher everyone once knew. The recording began with him quoting scripture, his voice calm, but laced with an eerie undertone. Then, he leaned closer to the camera, his demeanor shifting. "You think you know the truth," he whispered. But Amanda wasn't the victim you all believe she was. She knew. She knew the whole time about my father and me. She stayed quiet because she needed me, needed this image of a perfect family to keep her own secrets buried. She thought she was untouchable, but no one is untouchable. The tape ended abruptly, leaving investigators and the public alike with more questions than answers. What did Jonathan mean? What secrets was Amanda hiding? And why had he chosen to leave this cryptic message behind? While law enforcement ramped up their efforts to capture Jonathan, an unexpected ally emerged. David, the illegitimate son of Samuel Blake, who had testified at the trial. David claimed to have insight into Jonathan's mind, having grown up under the same oppressive influence of their father. "He's not running to escape," David told detectives. "He's running to prove something, to finish what he started. If you want to find him, you have to think like him." With David's help, the FBI began piecing together Jonathan's movements. His purchases, gas cans, ropes, and an untraceable burner phone painted a sinister picture. But one chilling detail stood out. He had visited a cemetery where Amanda's body was laid to rest. Authorities staked out Amanda's grave, suspecting Jonathan might return. For 3 nights, the cemetery remained silent, until the 4th. Just after midnight, a hooded figure emerged from the shadows, clutching a bouquet of wilted flowers. The figure knelt by Amanda's grave, their head bowed in what appeared to be prayer. Suddenly, floodlights illuminated the scene, and officers surrounded the figure. But as they moved closer, they realized something was wrong. The figure wasn't Jonathan. It was Reverend Samuel Blake, the disgraced patriarch himself. Samuel sneered at the officers, unfazed by their weapons. "You're chasing the wrong man," he muttered. "Jonathan's not hiding. He's preparing. And when he's ready, you'll wish you had never found him." The next day, a letter arrived at a local news station, sparking panic across the city. Written in Jonathan's handwriting, the letter detailed his grievances with Amanda, his father, and the congregation that once worshipped him. "You all wear masks," the letter began. "Amanda's wasn't the only one to slip. You cheered for me on Sundays and whispered behind my back by Monday. But don't worry, I'm coming back, and this time, I'm not alone." The cryptic message hinted at a larger plan. But what terrified authorities most was the closing line. "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, and now it's mine too." As investigators raced to decode Jonathan's letter, a new horror unfolded. Children from Jonathan's former congregation began disappearing. Over the course of a week, 5 children, all between the ages of 10 and 12, vanished without a trace. The disappearances sent shockwaves through Jacksonville, with parents afraid to let their children out of their sight. Police suspected Jonathan's involvement, but there was no evidence tying him to the crimes until David made a chilling connection. Each missing child had parents who were key members of Samuel Blake's congregation years ago. Could this be Jonathan's twisted way of avenging his own childhood? As the search for Jonathan intensified, David suggested focusing on locations from their childhood, places Jonathan might see as safe havens. One such place was a remote cabin deep in the Everglades, a property once owned by Samuel Blake. It was a place of twisted family retreats, where Jonathan and David had endured their father's oppressive teachings. Authorities launched a covert operation, navigating through swamps and dense foliage to reach the cabin. Inside, they found evidence that Jonathan had been there: maps, scattered pages from a Bible, and photographs of the missing children. But one discovery chilled them to the core: a crudely drawn diagram depicting the interior of a church, marked with red X's. It was clear Jonathan was planning something catastrophic, and time was running out. While investigators were focused on Jonathan's hideout, reports of strange gatherings began to surface. Witnesses described groups of people, dressed in black and chanting scripture, gathering in abandoned fields and barns. David was the first to connect the dots. "He's building a following," he said grimly. "He's always been charismatic. He knows how to manipulate people, just like our father did. And now he's using that to his advantage." One of the missing children's parents came forward, claiming they'd received a letter from Jonathan, urging them to join his righteous crusade. The parent had dismissed it as the ramblings of a madman until their child disappeared. It became clear that Jonathan wasn't just on the run. He was building an army. Jonathan's next move came in the form of a shocking video broadcasted live on social media. Standing in the pulpit of an abandoned church, surrounded by his followers and the missing children, he delivered a chilling sermon. "Faith has been corrupted," he declared, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "My father poisoned it, my wife mocked it, and you all allowed it. But I will cleanse it, even if I must burn it to the ground." The video ended with an ultimatum. The authorities had 24 hours to meet his demands, which included clearing his name and exposing the supposed sins of his father's congregation. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. As the 24-hour deadline approached, the church became a battleground. SWAT teams surrounded the building, negotiating with Jonathan through a bullhorn. Inside, his followers chanted hymns, while the children sat huddled together, visibly terrified. Jonathan, ever the manipulator, used the children as human shields, daring the police to storm the building. "If you enter," he warned, "their blood will be on your hands, not mine." Negotiators worked tirelessly to de-escalate the situation, but Jonathan was unyielding. It became clear that he was prepared to die for his cause and take as many people with him as he could. Desperate to prevent a massacre, David volunteered to go inside. "He'll listen to me," he told the negotiators. "I know how his mind works. If anyone can get through to him, it's me." Against protocol, the police allowed David to approach the church. As he stepped through the doors, he was met with the sight of his brother standing at the altar, flanked by armed followers. "You shouldn't have come here," Jonathan said, his voice cold. "I came because you're my brother," David replied, "and because this isn't you. This is him. This is our father's poison, still controlling you." For a moment, it seemed like Jonathan was listening, but then his expression darkened. "You don't understand," he said. "This is the only way to fix what he broke. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support us in creating more gripping stories like this. Your engagement helps us bring you the best content, and be sure to stick around till the end for the full, jaw-dropping story." David's attempt to reason with Jonathan took a tragic turn when one of Jonathan's followers fired a warning shot. The sound triggered chaos. SWAT teams stormed the church, flashbangs exploded, and terrified children scrambled for cover. In the chaos, David tackled Jonathan, trying to wrestle the weapon from his hands. "This isn't the way," he shouted, but Jonathan fought back with feral intensity. As officers closed in, a single gunshot rang out. The deafening echo of the gunshot silenced the pandemonium. Everyone froze, their eyes fixated on the altar. Smoke swirled in the air as the scene slowly came into focus. Jonathan and David were both on the ground, but only one was moving. David groaned, clutching his shoulder, where blood seeped through his shirt. Jonathan, however, lay eerily still, his weapon slipping from his hand. Officers swarmed the room, securing the children and detaining Jonathan's remaining followers. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like it was over. But as medics rushed to assess the situation, Jonathan suddenly sat up, a sinister smile spreading across his face. In his other hand, hidden beneath his body, he held a small detonator. "You think you've won?" Jonathan sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't the end. This is only the beginning." Jonathan revealed that he had rigged explosives throughout the church, hidden in the walls and under the pews. The congregation's cherished sanctuary had become a death trap. "This building has seen enough lies and betrayal," he said. "It's time to cleanse it with fire." The room erupted into chaos once more, as officers desperately evacuated the children and restrained Jonathan, trying to wrestle the detonator from his grasp. But his followers, still loyal despite the madness, blocked the exits, buying Jonathan precious seconds to enact his plan. As officers tried to subdue Jonathan, David made a decision that would haunt him forever. Summoning every ounce of strength, he lunged at his brother, tackling him to the ground once again. This time, he went for the detonator, managing to rip it from Jonathan's hand. "Don't do this," David pleaded, his voice breaking. "You're better than him. Don't let our father win." For a brief moment, Jonathan's expression softened, as though he were considering his brother's words. But then his face twisted into a mask of rage. "It's too late," he growled. "You can't save them." In the struggle, the detonator slipped from David's grasp and slid across the floor. An officer dived for it, barely managing to deactivate it in time. The relief was palpable, but fleeting. Amid the chaos, one of Jonathan's followers triggered a distraction by throwing a homemade smoke bomb, filling the church with a dense, choking fog. When the air cleared, Jonathan was gone, his cuffs lying empty on the ground. Officers scoured the area, but Jonathan had vanished into the night once more. His followers, though detained, refused to speak, their loyalty to him unwavering. Days later, another video surfaced online. In it, Jonathan stood in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by symbols and markings that investigators struggled to decipher. "You tried to stop me," he said, his tone eerily calm. "But this isn't over. You've only delayed the inevitable. The sins of this world run too deep to be forgiven, and I will see justice done, even if it costs me everything." He then revealed another horrifying detail. There were others like him, people who believed in his cause and were ready to act. "You think you're chasing one man," he said, with a sinister smile, "but you're facing an army." The video sent Jacksonville into a state of panic. Schools closed, churches canceled services, and the streets emptied as fear gripped the city. Law enforcement worked around the clock, following leads and interviewing anyone who had ever been connected to Jonathan or his father. David, now recovering in the hospital, was plagued by guilt. "I had a chance to stop him," he told investigators, "but I hesitated, and now more people are going to suffer because of it." Desperate for answers, law enforcement turned to David for help. "You know him better than anyone," an FBI agent said. "We need you to help us predict his next move." Despite his injuries, David agreed to assist in the manhunt. He pored over maps, old sermons, and family records, piecing together Jonathan's potential hiding spots and motivations. "Jonathan doesn't just want revenge," David explained. "He wants to be remembered. He wants to leave a legacy, even if it's one of destruction." As David worked with investigators, a chilling realization emerged. Jonathan's actions weren't random. Every location he targeted had ties to his father's past, a former church, an abandoned orphanage, even a community center that Samuel Blake had funded. David pieced it together. "He's dismantling our father's legacy," he explained. "He sees it as a way to cleanse himself of Samuel's influence. But he's also leaving a message, showing that he's smarter, more powerful than Samuel ever was." But there was a darker layer to the pattern. The locations formed a shape on the map, a cross that spanned multiple counties. At the center of the cross was one final destination, the megachurch, where Samuel Blake had preached his most famous sermons. Jonathan was planning something catastrophic, and time was running out. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Jonathan wasn't acting alone. Across Florida, law enforcement began arresting individuals who were part of an underground network supporting him. These followers, many of whom had ties to Samuel Blake's old congregation, had been radicalized by Jonathan's sermons and promises of purification. Interrogations revealed horrifying details. The network was stockpiling weapons, creating propaganda, and recruiting vulnerable individuals to their cause. Most chilling of all, they spoke of an event they called the Reckoning, a day when Jonathan planned to strike and force the world to face its sins. The date was set for 2 weeks from now, aligning with the anniversary of Samuel Blake's retirement sermon, a moment Jonathan saw as the pinnacle of his father's hypocrisy. With the date of the reckoning approaching, law enforcement prepared for the inevitable showdown at the megachurch. Officers planted hidden cameras and microphones throughout the building, hoping to intercept Jonathan before he could execute his plan. David insisted on being part of the operation. "He'll sense something's wrong if I'm not there," he argued. "If he thinks I've turned on him, he'll go underground again. We can't afford that." Reluctantly, the FBI agreed, assigning David a wire and a concealed panic button. He would enter the church alone, under the guise of joining Jonathan's movement. When David entered the church, he was struck by the eerie silence. The pews were filled with Jonathan's followers, their heads bowed in prayer. At the center of it all was Jonathan, his presence commanding and almost otherworldly. "Welcome home, brother," Jonathan said, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "I knew you'd see the truth eventually." David struggled to maintain his composure. "I came because I want to understand," he said carefully. "I want to know why you're doing this." Jonathan's expression softened, but his eyes burned with an unsettling intensity. "This world is broken, David. Our father broke it, and I'm the only one brave enough to fix it. You can stand with me, or fall with them." As Jonathan spoke, he revealed the final piece of his plan. Hidden beneath the megachurch was a series of explosives, enough to level the entire building and the surrounding area. The timer had already started. "You see, David," Jonathan said, with a chilling smile, "this isn't just about destroying our father's legacy. It's about making the world pay attention. They ignored our pain for too long. They need a wake-up call." David's heart raced as he glanced at the timer. He knew the authorities were listening, but there was no guarantee they could defuse the bombs in time. Desperate to buy time, David tried to reason with Jonathan. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice shaking. "We can fix this together. We can make them see without all this death." Jonathan's smile faded, replaced by a look of disappointment. "You still don't understand," he said. "This isn't about fixing anything. This is about justice." Realizing that words wouldn't work, David made a bold move. He lunged for the timer, hoping to disable it. But Jonathan was faster. He tackled David to the ground, pinning him down as the congregation erupted in chaos. "Traitor," Jonathan hissed. Pinned beneath Jonathan, David struggled to break free. His brother's strength was fueled by rage, but David refused to give up. "You don't have to let him control you," David shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "This isn't you, Jonathan. This is him. This is Samuel still pulling your strings." Jonathan's grip faltered for a split second, but his resolve returned. "No, David," he growled. "This is me taking back control. You've always been too weak to see the truth." Summoning all his strength, David shoved Jonathan off and scrambled to his feet. The timer continued to tick down, the ominous sound of each second echoing in the cavernous church. The agents listening outside were growing increasingly tense. The countdown was dangerously close to 0, and David's safety was far from guaranteed. "We can't wait any longer," the lead agent said, his voice sharp. "We need to storm the building." But another agent hesitated. "If we go in now, we risk triggering the explosives. We need David to get us more information on the trigger mechanism." Inside the church, David had managed to snatch a moment to activate his concealed earpiece. "I need time," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "He's got a remote detonator. If you come in now, it's over." As Jonathan tried to regain control of the situation, a rift began to form within his followers. Some were fully committed, shouting their allegiance and blocking exits to prevent anyone from leaving. But others, seeing the madness unfold, began to panic. "This isn't what we signed up for," one woman cried, clutching her young son. "This was supposed to be about faith, not murder." Jonathan's voice thundered through the chaos. "Do not falter now. The weak will always betray us. Only the strong will be saved." The congregation's division gave David the opening he needed. He approached the frightened members, urging them to leave. "You can still walk away from this," he said, his voice urgent. "Don't let him take you down with him." With the timer dangerously close to 0, David knew he had to act fast. He scanned the room, looking for anything that could help him disable the explosives. His eyes fell on a tangled mess of wires leading into the floorboards beneath the altar. But Jonathan noticed his gaze. "You think you can stop this?" he sneered, stepping in front of the wires. "You're too late. This is happening, David, whether you like it or not." David took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew had to be done. "Then I'll go down trying," he said, his voice steady. Jonathan pulled a gun from his waistband, aiming it directly at David. "Step aside," he ordered. "You don't have to die for them." David didn't move. "You've already decided that, haven't you? You're willing to kill me, your own brother, for this insanity." The room fell silent as the brothers stared each other down. Even Jonathan's most loyal followers hesitated, unsure of what would happen next. "You don't have to do this," David said softly, taking a cautious step forward. "It's not too late to stop." For a brief moment, it seemed like Jonathan might lower the gun, but then his expression hardened. "It was always too late," he said. With only seconds remaining on the timer, the SWAT team made their move. They burst into the church, shouting commands and firing tear gas canisters to disorient the crowd. Jonathan's followers scattered, some surrendering, while others tried to fight back. Amid the chaos, Jonathan fired his weapon, but not at David. Instead, he aimed for the timer, shattering it into pieces. Sparks flew as the mechanism short-circuited, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Jonathan turned to David, his face eerily calm. "You think you've won?" he said. "You have no idea what's coming next." As SWAT officers secured the building and began evacuating the remaining congregation members, the question loomed: where was Jonathan? Amid the pandemonium, no one had seen him since the moment he shattered the timer. David, now restrained by officers for his own safety, yelled frantically, "He's still here! He's always had a way out!" It didn't take long for investigators to find the hidden tunnel beneath the altar, leading into the dense Florida wilderness. Jonathan had vanished once again, leaving behind chaos and unanswered questions. As authorities scoured the church for clues, they uncovered a chilling sight in the basement, a wall covered in cryptic symbols and Bible verses painted in red. At the center of it all was a handwritten manifesto. The manifesto spoke of a grand plan, far greater than anyone could imagine. This was only the beginning, Jonathan had written. The world will see. They will understand. Faith will rise from the ashes. Attached to the wall was a list of names, politicians, religious leaders, and even law enforcement officers, all marked with targets. After being released from custody, David spoke briefly to the press. His voice was heavy with emotion as he addressed the public. "My brother is a broken man," he said. "But the truth is, we were both broken by the same monster, our father. I tried to save him, but maybe some people can't be saved. Maybe he doesn't want to be." He paused, his eyes filled with sorrow. "But this isn't over. I know Jonathan. He's not done. And when he resurfaces, I'll be there to stop him." The camera pans to various scenes across the country. Nervous congregations gathering under heightened security, law enforcement conducting raids, and citizens locking their doors. Jonathan Blake's name is on everyone's lips, his twisted ideology sparking debates and fears nationwide. Meanwhile, deep in the Florida Everglades, a lone figure walks through the swamp under the cover of night. Jonathan's face is obscured, but his confident stride and eerie smile are unmistakable. He looks down at a notebook in his hands, filled with new plans and scribbled names. "Faith will rise," he mutters to himself, disappearing into the shadows. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Are we looking at a man driven by vengeance, or something even more sinister? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for updates on this gripping story.